Simon.
Hi Heather, how are you?
I'm all right. Thank you for coming and having a quick chat here with us today.
It's a pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.
Conversations around commercial properties, I think what I'm trying to call it, but yeah, we'll see if that's a thing that lands.
Sounds good to
Do
me.
you want to introduce yourself to people who don't know you?
So, Simon Crowe, Low Carbon Alliance. Low Carbon Alliance is a consultancy operating in the property and net zero space, which I think we're going to explore further in our chat.
What does that mean? Yeah, tell us what it means and what you're actually doing, keeping you busy.
So, Low Carbon was set up, as you know, about 12 years ago now. And originally, the modus operandi was to reduce carbon emissions from property. But I'd say in the period from 2010 till 2020, that was a bit of a failure of execution of that business plan, since there wasn't much appetite to reduce emissions from property. But low carbon found its way into renewables, so that sustained us for that period. And today we've got a development programme delivering gigawatts of large-scale solar farms and batteries to help decarbonise the grid in the UK. So as part of this energy transition, whilst we try and decarbonise property, our grid is also being decarbonised, so where we get our power from. So our development programme with a funder, Kojima, is looking at developing lots of large-scale solar and battery projects connected to the grid in the UK to help decarbonise our energy supply. So that's really exciting. And now the other part of the business is really beginning to move since the country's commitment to net zero, which was all driven by the Paris Accord, which was to move away from our sort of 1990s Kyoto commitments to really set the bar higher in terms of decarbonisation. That government commitment really changed the dynamic of the sector, and what we see today now with ESG is some real driving targets for investors to actually take action to reduce emissions from property. That 2010 to 2020 period was more reporting and just really getting a baseline for where folk are at. But this is now the decade of project delivery, which is what we're about. Yeah. And our business was always about doing projects. I've never been that interested in just writing lots of reports that sit on shelves. We like to get into plant rooms, get into buildings. If you remember from my development days, let's find land, let's get planning, let's build an office building. So I think today the business is now doing its large-scale development of renewables, but also now we're supporting clients in decarbonising their portfolios. So it's really exciting now that we're into project delivery mode rather than talking about change and improved performance in buildings. It's now beginning to happen. It's great.
It's amazing that it's taken that long for it to come forward, but I suppose now you must be rushed off your feet and having everything going all at once. Everyone wants to hear from you. Everyone wants to have a bit of you, I think.
We've had to be patient, I have to say. I must have bored lots of people over the last 15 years in pubs talking about energy and waste and LED light bulbs and control systems, solar panels. But I have to say, I'm more popular in the pub now. I was standing outside a West End establishment, and I dare mention solar panels, but all of a sudden people stopped to take notice.
Yeah.
And I was being offered business cards. Now some of that is net zero, but then some of that is also the cost of power. Since the war in Ukraine, has begun, we've seen an unprecedented spike in energy costs. So not only have you got the sustainability agenda, you've now just got cost reduction, protect your business from price volatility. That's seriously helped boost the market as well. So the phone is ringing to us from companies looking to lower their costs and decarbonise.
Is that landlords as well as occupiers, or is your work still quite landlord focused, with people trying to kind of sort out the portfolio, the asset, and do a sort of corporate ESG level piece? Or have you got occupiers as well now coming to you saying, actually, we want to understand it too?
It's a bit of both. Traditionally, we're more of a landlord's advisor. Yeah. Saying that, we're now pushing more into the commercial industrial sector to help them reduce those costs, because we recognise there's a lot of pain out there for commercial businesses. So But the landlords are only really reacting to what they hear from their tenants, whilst there is an ESG agenda. I'll give you a great example. One of our clients knew that electric vehicle charging was going to be required across their portfolio, mainly office buildings. We set about a strategy called EV Ready. So what that means is, rather than deploying lots of chargers, we were looking at the infrastructure within the building to establish that there was enough power, that if you put in a load of chargers, you weren't going to affect the amount of power in the building. The boards where all the chargers connect were very old, so they weren't actually suitable to host new connection points. So we went through a portfolio of about 20 buildings, making each building EV ready, so that when tenants did start asking for chargers, that the boards and everything was there to start plugging in charging points. Now, by the time we got to the end of that process, the tenants had already started asking for them, so we went straight from EV ready into deployment of chargers. And that programme hasn't looked back since. So we've put in an initial number of chargers into each building, but now we're already going back to put in more because the tenant demand is just going up and up and up. So I think that's a good example of showing where a landlord can try and preempt what they think is going to happen, but in fact it's a bit like the field of dreams. If you build it, they will come.
Yeah.
When you start offering renewable energy or EV charging points to tenants, you'll actually find the demand on the other side is quite significant.
Yeah.
So I think that point of engagement with tenants, canvassing them regularly in terms of what are their objectives, is really important for landlords.
Yeah, and that's obviously what we try and do alongside you. We do a bit more of the S of your E of ESG, and so obviously what we talk about is like listening hard, research-led, asking the end user what they need, and that is also obviously asking the C-suite of people in companies, but obviously we do our best to actually ask the users of the space, do they actually have intention to get an electric car in the next 3 to 5 years, and it's asking people on a person-by-person basis to try and get that information through.
It's a different world, isn't it, from our agency days?
Isn't it? I know.
Yeah, all this research that goes into it. But I think all these organisations are much broader in terms of their own awareness of their impact. I think they're having to be if they're a publicly listed company. I mean, it's so much more important now to be able to measure their impact both socially and environmentally. Back in the day, we never asked those questions because I don't think it was that important to the corporate, and it wasn't that important to us as developers or agents to market space.
Yeah, I mean, it's becoming more important for everyone's got different objectives, different end goals, but obviously everyone's got the same ideas that they need to obviously be broader thinking, think forward ahead, and make sure their targets are met and things like that. So, you mentioned like PVs and solar panels and EV charging. What is next? PIRs was a thing that came in ages ago to make sure the lighting comes on and be. What's next? What's coming down the road at us?
Right. So everyone likes new shiny stuff. That's what we understand in this sector. So obviously PV panels generate power. We've got EV charging for this transition to electric vehicle and mobility. We've seen all these scooters popping up here and there, electric scooters. But the thing that is still very, just less appealing, or sexy, let's call it, is waste efficiency, right? So your PIR detection is a great example of a very, very rudimentary technology that would switch a light on when somebody walks into a room and switch it off. So it takes the human element away from that control. And then we also had, so when I was at BAM doing the property development, we had the sunlight detection. So if the sun was streaming through the windows, the lights would automatically dim. And I thought it's such simple technology. Yeah. We can retrofit that into all these older buildings. So the energy efficiency piece still hasn't been properly maximised in terms of how that can reduce cost and reduce emissions. Everyone seems to want to generate and put new technology into buildings, but actually the platforms that are available for monitoring building performance to establish whether buildings are using the amount of power that they should do day to day in the context of the outside weather conditions or how many people are in the building, That is still very under exploited. So we've got clients that are beginning to wake up to how you can visualise data and energy consumption and really see the poor performance in buildings. So that's still the first step. So that's not new technology. That's still a relatively rudimentary, hooking into your meters, picking up the half-hourly signals from energy consumption, and then reacting to any spikes. But what comes after that is the whizzy bit, which you're going to like.
I'm listening.
So this is artificial intelligence now.
That sounds a bit scary, though. What does that mean, really?
Well, a colleague of mine would say you've got to give yourself over to the AI. Now, what we realise is that human intervention in buildings is part of the problem. So where you have tenants moving into buildings, if you're a landlord that's not on site, you are at the whim of some of your tenants moving in with their fit out. So there's 2 or 3 things that you can do in terms of monitoring that building to see if there's any increase in energy use that is beyond your targets for energy use or carbon. So you can engage back with your tenant to understand what's happening. But the artificial intelligence effectively sits above your building management system. And what that enables the building to do is, rather than be reactive to the environment, say to the weather, to the internal conditions, how many people are coming to work. So as you appreciate, as people come into work, the building gets warmer. The traditional system, the BMS system, will have setting points. And when the building gets too hot, the thermostat will trigger and the cooling will come on to bring the temperature back down again. In that process, there's a lot of waste because the building is heating up and then you're having to cool it down. What the AI does is it monitors building behaviour over a period of time, so let's say 2 months. It picks up weather data in terms of the forecast, so we've all got apps on our phones. We can all see what the weather's going to be like in the next few hours. And it takes that learning and prepares the building for the day to avoid it getting to the point where it's overheated and then has to cool down. And in that process, there's a lot of saving. It's a lot more efficient to manage a building like that. But for you or I, it's not a human process. This is an algorithm that comes into the building, sits above the BMS, and learns from the behaviour of occupants.
Is this technology available now? Are people beginning to use it, or how far away do we feel that it is?
It is available. We're looking at some trials ourselves to really look at the effectiveness, but it's certainly available. Again, the impact is at portfolio level. So you would look at a fund with a number of buildings. You apply it across the portfolio, and then you'll really see savings ramp up in terms of kilowatt hours being reduced in heating or cooling buildings, and then obviously the equivalent in carbon being saved.
And do you need, I'm guessing, the tenants' cooperation so you can drill down onto floors and have this data and have this access to what pockets of space are used more, so you can isolate different air conditioning systems or whatever it might be, lighting systems. So there's an inherent cooperation that's required between landlord and tenant and systems, which is not always as straightforward as one hopes it should be.
Absolutely. You're going to need collaboration, I think, in terms of sharing of data. So there's data sets which tenants will have through their sub-meters and how the internal environment they want in that space. But I think that collaboration has to start at the very beginning. So when they come in or they're signing a new lease, you need to agree your targets for the building and how you're going to work together with the landlord and the building managers to achieve those targets. And you'd like to think we're all aligned in terms of reduction of energy use. And because of the high costs, ultimately all you're doing is saving money for the tenant. So it should be that you're aligned with your tenants in terms of the ambitions. And then I think in terms of the AI, again, all you're doing is managing an internal environment. And what you should be doing is eradicating buildings getting too hot and discomfort levels in a building. And then getting to the point where somebody's too hot and then they're whacking on the air conditioning.
It requires collaboration between landlords and tenants, which is fine on paper, but it's not something that's necessarily going to come naturally to those tenants or those landlords, where in the past and as a result of leases, they've got very specific responsibilities on certain bits of M&E. How are we going to address that and sort of bring it together so that we can do this AI on older buildings and retro install it?
Have you done much canvassing on behalf of landlords to tenants about their ambitions? Because my own belief is that if you scratch beneath the surface, like with the EV experience, until you ask the question, you don't know what their appetite is, and then you'll be pleasantly surprised that actually they are very much aligned with your ambitions. For reporting purposes, previously there's been a lot of trying to avoid the big carbon issue in terms of, I'm not in the building, I'm a landlord, it's the tenant's responsibility, they're in occupation, they're in control of the lighting, they're in control of the environment within their areas. I think that's beginning to change. That was always called Scope 3. So you could be responsible for your Scope 1 and 2 emissions, but Scope 3 is the tenants. But I think now that is maturing, and landlords recognise that they have a responsibility as the building owner to support tenants, improve the performance of that building. So when we talk about a net zero building, we talk about how the building performs in terms of kilowatt hours consumed per square metre or per square foot, if you like. You and I are of a certain age and still working in imperial.
I still work in square feet.
So that applies to a building as a whole. You don't have a net zero reception and common areas and forget about your tenanted areas. It has to be a whole building approach.
The accreditations are like understanding this though as well, because neighbours definitely will only give the full accreditation after the building is occupied and taking into account the tenant's occupation as well. So if the tenant wants to be shown to be in a really strong, environmentally aware, forward-looking building, and the landlords are delivering that, they're actually only going to get the best ratings as and when they collaborate fully with each other. I think it's coming, but I think on older stuff, I think the old leases, old managing agent protocol, I think it's it will change, and I think occupiers definitely will be looking for it.
So that's a big threat to those old buildings.
Yeah.
So with the new buildings, you can set these things up at day one. We focus on the existing built environment. So the building stock, which is with us today and will still be with us in 2050, is the biggest challenge that we've got as a sector. So let's call it a real estate sector. New buildings are well catered for in terms of building regulations and technologies to apply within those buildings to make running costs low and carbon low. For the existing buildings, the technologies are there to retrofit, as we talked about, PIR detection, BMS trend systems, AI that can go into existing portfolios. But again, the tenant engagement is really important. But I think if we establish common ground that you're going to lower running costs and emissions, the cooperation you should get back from tenants, I think, would be very strong. Then in terms of managing the environment through BMS systems and sensors, you're actually eradicating discomfort from a building. It's not getting too hot then to be cool. The whole point of the AI is to stop that inefficiency. So you're managing a comfort level, recognising how many people will probably be coming into that building, what the external environment is like outside. So is it a cold day where heating traditionally would come on, or is it going to be one of those warm days in winter where actually you put your winter setting on, but actually you don't need it? The AI will predict that because it's looking at all the collective data that's available. So it won't be heating the building unnecessarily on what is a warm winter's day. And I think this year is a good example of that. It's been unseasonably warm all October. So at home we're all managing our own systems, but there seems to be a lack of connection between the way buildings are managed and the way buildings are occupied. And it's that aspect of it which will really make a big impact on reducing emissions from our real estate sector. And then the accreditations will follow. Your lower costs, your lower emissions, and you'll get your accreditations. But the danger for the existing stock and for the landlords and the investors is that you still need to make a long-term plan. Building management is one thing, but you've got to transition away from fossil fuels. So you've got to start making a plan to get your gas boilers out and either put your replacement heating systems in, whether that's heat pumps, whether it's district heating. And you need to start modelling your building and understanding where you can intervene, when you're going to intervene, and what impact it has on lowering emissions.
On the assets that we deal with, there's very little gas in them. But I think in the residential sector, that's going to be felt more. I don't understand residential. We just talk about commercial here today.
Yeah, I think
it's a huge thing that has to be added in to think about and talk about for the general public, I suppose.
Yeah. So a lot of those air conditioning systems are just electric.
Yeah.
So you're going to be decarbonising your power supply. So where's your power coming from? We've seen a lot of interrogation of how green supplies are.
Greenwashing or social
greenwashing, right?
Social washing as well is
absolutely.
Talked about, yeah.
So we're working with UK Green Building Council on their Advancing Net Zero programme with lots of great professionals from both the real estate sector and the energy sector about how landlords and tenants can procure power that is genuinely green, either from UK renewables, and you can create an audit trail to say, actually, I'm getting my power from this wind farm or solar farm in the UK, rather than this sort of murky market where you're on a green tariff, but actually it's what they call it's a REGO backed, right? Which is the power has come from a source, the certificates come from a different source, and I'm putting the two together, and here's your power, which is the murky part of the green tariff.
But hopefully with ESG as a whole, then the G part of this, the governance side, should be making those items should be really clear for people. I mean, the idea is that governance covers everything. It should be about, living wages. It should be about anti-slavery. It should be about, all of those really, really big, deep, making sure that there's underrepresented minorities on boards of buildings, and it's also you borrow the governance from the landlords and the funds, but also from the occupiers. So you make sure you reference and reflect back the governance of, the space that you're in. But I think also it's things like that you need to obviously, you can add that in as a policy that you want to make sure that that's...
I had a conversation with a real estate investor that's called in one of the more traditional groups. And they were explaining to me they had a real challenge investing in solar across their real estate because of the lack of transparency in the supply chain for solar. So a lot of the solar panels are made in China.
Exactly that. I was going to say the whole thing that you spend more of your carbon actually making a solar panel that you save than actually using a solar panel.
And there's those other things. It's the slavery part.
Yeah.
What are their working standards in the factories in China? So what's happening on the other side of the sector, so in the solar sector, is there are now programs for driving anyone who wants to sell product in Europe to be transparent, to be accountable for where their panels are coming from, the conditions in which they're made. And so if they want to sell product in Europe, they've got to come up to these standards. So we're members of Solar Energy UK. Solar Energy UK are working with their European counterparts to work with the manufacturers to ensure that there is transparency and reporting on those aspects, so that real estate investors that have very good ESG policies can be comfortable in investing in those technologies. So what we're seeing there is across the sectors, it's becoming joined up and aligned in terms of what UK, European responsible investors want to see to help them make decisions to transition into use low carbon technologies. So again, it's coming back to that point where ESG is a really good system, in my opinion, compared to the old CSR, because we're talking about metrics which you can measure. We're talking about information which you have to report on, rather than previously it was all a bit... it was more of a subjective piece.
Yeah. Well, the E, you're mentioning the E bit, I think, which you can measure. Obviously, we deal a lot with the social and the S of ESG, and we are, it is more qualitative. It is harder to measure. absolutely. It isn't just a number per se. But then you're right. There are metrics and there are parameters, and you can show improvement. And it's really important that all aspects of the social is considered alongside the environmental, because they interact so strongly with each other. Because better quality workplace environments obviously add to better quality products and productivity as a whole. What are your biggest challenges that you're finding at the moment?
I'd say it's still the energy efficiency piece. So folk they like technologies, so solar panels, EV charging, but to be efficient and save energy is still a hard sell. I equate it to the if I said to you, look, I can make you £5 today, right? Either I'm going to save you £5, you won't notice me doing anything, you'll finish your day and you'll have an extra £5 in your bank account, or I'm going to give you £5 at the end of the day. Which would you prefer?
I'd take the £5.
Most people would take the £5. And that is the difference between energy efficiency and energy generation. So whilst we're seeing a really big uptake in on-site renewables, solar panels, retrofit onto rooftops, office buildings, schools, hospitals, industrial units, those buildings are still not as efficient as they could be.
And we've got to do both at the same time.
Absolutely.
Otherwise we're not going to make it, are we?
Absolutely. And the costs of being efficient, to me, is a platform. You get your building on a platform, you can visualise performance of buildings in relation to their environment. So how many people are in there? Is it hot outside? Is it cold outside? What should this building be doing? You get the building on a platform, you can visualise it immediately. Oh, look, the building's on at the weekends. It's coming on at night. Why is the system coming on at 4 a.m. and not 7 o'clock?
Especially with flexible working and hybrid working, it's surely required even more so to make sure that we are not actually doing more than we need to on days when we are people at home.
Working patterns have totally changed.
That's a whole nother conversation for another day if you'll come back, because obviously in due course, people working from home, that carbon use at home will have to be, I'm going to say monitored, but it's also going to have to be declared by companies, isn't it? Because that is going to form part of their carbon use. So it might get to a stage where actually working at home in my drafty single glazed Victorian house is not attractive, because it will be...
Well, what we found is
I'm
a bit old school, as you know, so I like people to come into the office. Same. And we've got lots of youngsters that work for us, and I think there's much more of a social and mental benefit for coming in and learning rather than being at home. But what we also found that during the summer that we've just had, people would like to come in because of the air conditioning in the office. And now that energy prices are really high at home, people like to come in because they're using, it's not their energy costs. But we're trying to promote this environment where people want to come in.
All their chargings in
all of that. We all do on the train, right? Where's the plug? Let's just charge everything up before I get home. But we're trying to create this positive environment where people want to come into the office again.
Yeah.
But I think in terms of accounting for people's environmental impact from being at home a lot of the time, at some point, that's going to have to be measured.
Coming down the road at us too. You and I have known each other a very long time. I remember when I had my daughter, I phoned you and said, if this acquisition comes off, please could you do it for me? Because I'm about to have a baby, and you very kindly said yes. So I'll always be forever grateful for you for that. But you started life as an agent back in the day.
I did.
And
it's true.
We're beginning to ask people the sort of the same-ish question about what was your first project or your first thing in property. But you mentioned...
My first deal?
Yeah, your first deal.
So, my first deal. So, back in the day, I was working at Brazier Harris, as it was then. It's now called something else, Brazier Freeth. I was in that period where I was doing lots of different activities, so a bit of valuation, a bit of rating,
training,
a bit of agency.
Yeah.
In my journey to become chartered. The first deal was in Watford Town Centre, at the top of the parade. It was an old Halifax Building Services, so an old estate agents as it was, when Halifax went into a estate agency. And then that was closing, so it had an A2 use, and I had to get a change of use. And what had happened in Watford at that time was the Harlequin Centre had opened, which was the big shopping centre. and a big shopping mall, and the top of the high street was dying. So everything was going over to restaurants and takeaways, and this was a small unit. So we got change of use to A3. I don't think that even exists anymore.
I was going to say, it's all changed.
doesn't.
It's all changed. In the hope of resurrecting the high street again. So it's similar.
Yeah.
You
But
started.
listen to this, right? I mean, not many people can say this about their first deal. So this would have been, what are we now? 96. So 25 plus years ago. It's still there.
What is it?
So the tenant that we let it to was called Top's Pizza.
Right.
And it's still there. It's still trading. I think it might have even expanded into the neighbouring unit. So 26 years on, I still bore the kids when we drive past it. I say, see that pizza place? And I know a few people that still live in Watford, and it's got a great reputation, actually.
I was going to say, have you ever had a pizza from your Top's Pizza?
To be honest with you, I haven't.
Have you
but
not?
It does get very good reports. Maybe I should change that.
To celebrate, to remember.
Top's Pizzas. Maybe I'll do it on the 30th anniversary of that deal. When's that?
They've got to last that long.
Yeah, well, I think their
think that'd be
their
fun.
pizzas are that good.
There you go. You've got to wait a bit then for your pizza.
Yeah.
Good. I think it's nice to reminisce and remember what we did way back then.
Yeah. Well, I bumped into Trevor Church the other day.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah. He's telling me he's close to retirement now.
But still going at the moment.
Still going
Yeah,
at the moment.
absolutely.
But I'll tell you where we bumped into him at Specsavers. I was getting my first pair of glasses.
Reading glasses. Well, I've been in the glasses team for a long time.
catching
So,
up.
welcome to another great team. Thank you very much for coming today and sharing your amazing knowledge of everything ESG. And I hope we get to do some more
We will.
stuff together
for sure.
in the future. Thank you.
Thank you.